I just heard from a friend of mine that somebody they know applied to a carbon removal job at Microsoft, and the person at Microsoft recommended they join AirMiners. That is so cool to know that there's a fan of AirMiners in Microsoft recommending other people join. I've heard so many stories like that lately of just kind of just one-off little things here and there that I hear like, oh, somebody is already, in AirMiners, or somebody's like well aware of AirMiners, or they recommend it to somebody. And just more and more this is going to happen. With every recommendation from somebody behind the scenes at Microsoft or Shopify or the Department of Energy, more connections are being made and more people are becoming air miners. And to me, that's what it means for air miners to be the place for people pulling carbon from the air. So I wanted to talk a little bit about where air miners came from, where it is today, and where it's headed. And this is for people that are maybe you're in air miners, or maybe you've just heard about it. Maybe you've gotten all these messages from me over the last couple of years and you're like, he's always talking about this air miners thing. Like, not really sure what it is, but it sounds pretty cool. This is kind of like, here's how it's working, here's where it came from, here's where it's headed. So AirMiners started as this idea of like kind of building a LinkedIn for carbon removal. There was another part about it that was like kind of trying to digitize these connections, because we had met people like Noah from Carbon 180. Matthew and I interviewed him. And just said, like, what's going on in carbon removal? How are you thinking about it? We also got to talk to Christoph Jaspe from Nori. But at that time, he wasn't at Nori. He was he was like the carbon A-list guy. He's like, me and my friends are moving to Seattle. We're going to start something. It's like, wow, that's what Nori turned into. So that's where it started. It was this idea of something like a LinkedIn network, something about helping kind of digitize the brains of these people that were super connected in the space, like Noah and Christoph. Then it grew into a Slack community led by Devorit Mausner, and that's where this kind of like daily connection stuff started to come in. Because before that, I think it was a lot of people communicating once in a while over email, and some people were obviously like working together, so they would talk a lot. But there wasn't just kind of this general low-level like buzz of all the stuff that's happening. So AirMiners really became the place for that. And I remember being at the Verge Carbon Conference last year, and I remember going around to the different booths in the carbon removal corner, and I was meeting all the teams and CEOs, and every conversation, AirMiners would just come up somehow. Like, I wasn't going around talking about AirMiners, but it would just bubble up that people were, they had a conversation on AirMiners, they met somebody through AirMiners, and it really, that was a turning point where it became the place for people pulling carbon from the atmosphere. So that's a bit of history about where AirMiners came from. I was just talking with Matthew about this last week, and gosh, there's so many kind of OG people who have been around AirMiners for a while now. I'm sure they have their stories and how they connected, how it became what it is. I'd love to hear those stories if people are up for emailing me or talking about it. Maybe we could turn into an event or something like that in the future. But that's really a brief history of AirMiners, and where it is today is a very active Slack group of over 600 people working on pulling carbon from the atmosphere. We have an incredible event series that's run by Jason, the events director, about twice a month, and we're planning events for the next couple months through the end of the year. So those events are mostly attended by people from within the AirMiners Slack group, but there's also plenty of people from the broader carbon industry and people who are just getting interested. So I'm loving what I'm seeing coming out of the AirMiners community. There's entrepreneurs, investors, people finding their way into the carbon removal industry or finding a new job, becoming an air miner. I think of Quincy from Carbix. So his whole story is starting out on the AirMiners Slack group. He got connected to his first investor, IndieBio, just through like a direct message on Slack, and now they're funded and they're creating a company to pull carbon from the atmosphere. And I think about Aaron and his company Realize Mars. He just announced on an AirMiners event that he found a person he can hire, a chemist, through the AirMiners group. That's really cool, right? So these are people that are looking for help, they're inventing things, they're creating new jobs, finding new jobs. All that stuff is happening at AirMiners. So to me, that's what AirMiners can be. It can be this massive lever to open up creativity and invention and connections in the carbon removal industry in a way that rapidly accelerates our ability to pull carbon from the air. It's not a technology or an invention per se, but the ability to make a connection between one person who's got an idea and another person who has the capital to help them, or one person who is working on a new concept but needs to hire somebody to help make it happen. If we can shave a year or a month or sometimes even just a day off of those connections, that's a type of improvement that compounds. So again, I've said this before, but we could leave this up to be something that's organic. We could just kind of let people connect and grow friendships and relationships. But really, AirMiners has this potential to figure out how to navigate those things and then share the lessons that we learn with the rest of the community. What works, what doesn't work. Ultimately, that's why I think so many people are becoming AirMiners. They're laser focused on how do we pull more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? How do we capture it? How do we store it? How do we turn it into useful things? And that common purpose is what makes people AirMiners. Whether your specific thing that you're working on or interested in is soil or direct air capture or collaboration or policy, all of us are brought together because we care about pulling carbon from the atmosphere. So from those of you in the AirMiners community, I'd love to hear from you. What is AirMiners to you? What's working? What's great about AirMiners? What do you sometimes think like, that could be a lot better? Or what bugs you about AirMiners? One last thought, I'm thinking about AirMiners t-shirts. Hit me up if you're interested in one.